Good evening and welcome to this Tenant Farmers Association webinar this evening. You're very welcome if you are watching live or if you're watching later on our YouTube channel. If you go to our YouTube channel, you'll be able to look back at all of the various webinars that we have put on, and this one, which will be available in a few days' time once we have had the opportunity to edit it into a watchable format. My name is George Dunn. I'm the Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association, and I'm very pleased to welcome you tonight. Our National Chairman, who should have been chairing tonight, sadly can't make it, so he's asked me to step into the breach, and I am delighted to do so. So as I said, we are recording this webinar tonight, and it will be available on our YouTube channel to watch back on demand when you like. You can also subscribe to our channel so you get notified of when we put up new content or when things change on that site. As we go through this evening, you will see that there is a button at the bottom of your screen which is called Q&A. We would very much encourage you to add any questions that you want to ask of any of the panel speakers tonight, and we will attempt to come to those when we get to our Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. We have had some pre-submitted questions as well, which we will go through tonight as we have time to do so. We're really delighted that Barclays are sponsoring tonight's webinar, as they have done our whole series of webinars. Barclays have worked with us for a number of years, so we're absolutely delighted that Barclays have sponsored us tonight, and will also sponsor our future webinars as well. So tonight we're looking at, as I say, the Sustainable Farming Incentive for 2022, and we're looking specifically at how that plays out in relation to Uplands, Commons, and the Moorland standard. And this is in England, and how we can practically engage with the new policy. So we have speakers tonight from DEFRA and from the Foundation for Common Land. And when we get to the Q&A section, we will be joined by our Junior National Vice Chair, Helen Radmore, who's a tenant farmer on Dartmoor. So let me introduce you to the first two of our speakers tonight, and we're delighted to have Jonathan Marsden from DEFRA and Henry Ashcroft from DEFRA. Now, Jonathan is the head of the SFI standards for environmental land management within DEFRA. He has had a long-running and eclectic career with various bits of the historic DEFRA family, we might say, through things like the RDS and the FRCA, and obviously Natural England, and now DEFRA. And he has been involved in some of the old schemes like ESAs and the first countryside stewardship scheme. But now he's back. He's in DEFRA with a national role, looking at SFI standards for DEFRA. So it's great to have Jonathan on our panel. He's also from a dairy farmer family based in the Peak District. So he comes with both official and practical experience of this important topic. So we look forward to hearing what Jonathan's got to say. And he is to be joined tonight by Henry Ashcroft, also from DEFRA, and Henry is a policy advisor for the Environmental Land Management Programme, and he's working specifically on policy and strategy for common land across the three new environmental land management elements, which are SFI, local nature recovery, and landscape recovery. So without further ado, you're not here to listen to me. I'm going to hand you over to Jonathan and Henry, who will go through their presentation tonight. So thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Henry. Over to you.
Thank you very much, George, and good evening, everybody. An absolute pleasure to be here tonight to discuss and take questions and queries regarding the ELM, and particularly the SFI approaching the uplands and on common land. But what we're going to cover in the next few minutes is, first of all, just a few facts and figures around the uplands. We're going to talk a little bit, just for a slide, on the agricultural transition plan, there's far more to agricultural transition than just ELM or SFI, and we just need to set the scheme in the wider context. Just a single slide on the overview of the ELM scheme, the different elements of it, and we will also then get into some detail regarding the sustainable farming incentive, our approach in the uplands, support for the moorlands over the transition period, and how we're looking and taking forward the development of the moorland standard. And we'll then pick up the approach we've got in SFI to tenancies, and then Henry's going to talk a little bit around commons. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So just some facts and figures, and many of you might have seen these before. We've about 2.2 million hectares of upland in England. We know a significant part of the uplands is controlled by big upland estates, not just in the private sector, but we've got the utilities, the MOD, etc., etc. In the severely disadvantaged element of the uplands, we know 30 to 40% of businesses and around 20% of jobs are directly linked to agriculture, forestry, and the fishing sectors, although the fishing one's an interesting one. And what we do know, and I know it's not on the slide at the moment, we know that the uplands in particular are heavily dependent on both BPS and the agri-environment schemes. They form a significant part of farm income and profit, more so than in the lowlands. There are just over or just short of 750,000 hectares of moorland in England in the SDAs, and not quite all of that is claiming BPS. And of the BPS area, roughly 3/4 of it is already in existing ES and CS schemes. And that's significant in terms of what we'll talk about later. Just short of 20% of the SDA is registered common land. And in terms of tenanted sector, we know that the bigger proportion of the land is farmed under tenancies than in the lowlands. Figures vary, but around just over 50% is tenanted in the uplands. And then finally, 53% of triple SIs are in the uplands, or they were in 2013. Next slide, please. So agricultural transition, just setting ELM and SFI in a slightly wider context. So our objectives for the agricultural transition as a whole are to improve the natural environment, to improve animal health and welfare, to reduce our carbon emissions and to store more carbon, to support the resilience of our agriculture and our ecosystems, and to make farm businesses more sustainable in the widest sense. And ELM is just one part of the package of measures that we're putting in place to deliver those transition objectives. So there will be the environmental land management schemes, but there's also looking at perhaps more at the economic sustainability side of things. There's the Farming Investment Fund. There's funding available through the Farming Resilience Fund at the moment for advice and regarding adapting to life without BPS. We've got the Farm Innovation Programme. There is currently farming in protected landscapes, what we like to refer to as FIPL, for those of you that are in national parks or AONBs, and then there will be a tree health scheme. We often get the challenge, why isn't food production a public and good? Why isn't food production part of the ELM scheme, the objectives? And let's address that one now. In the food production isn't part of, if you like, the ELM objectives, because the marketplace delivers food production for us. What the marketplace doesn't deliver is environmental goods. There's no way of you taking your wildlife margins or the amount of peat you've got down to the local auction mart and getting a price for it. So ELM, what we're trying to do with the ELM scheme to a certain extent is replicate for the environment what the supply the food sector does for food production, to provide an economic return for those farmers that want to deliver environmental goods and farm in more sustainable ways, and supporting the economic development of the industry through the Farming Investment Fund, for example. Next slide, please. So just the structure of elements, some of you will have seen versions of this slide many times before, but just to set this in the context before we get into the detail. So currently ELM is structured around sort of 3 schemes or 3 pillars, if you like. The sustainable farming incentive, which we want to be simple and universal. Everybody in England that's farming land will be eligible to join this. We want to reward farming practices that benefit the environment, and it will be based around standards, and we'll come to a little bit more detail of that in a moment. Local nature recovery is going to be locally targeted for the environmental goals of that area, the area that you're farming in. It is going to be more complex, and it will include making space for nature alongside food production, whereas I would characterize SFI as modifying agricultural activities for the benefit of the environment. As we move into the local nature recovery, there will be a role for making more space. There'll be more of an impact on food production, and we can pick up on the implications of that for tenants in the Q&A. Local nature recovery is going to be option-based, and we will be encouraging collaboration between holdings. So not in the same way as commons, but we want people's agreements in the locality to be striving towards similar goals, and there may be an element of encouraging collaboration around that. And then finally, landscape recovery. This is looking at large-scale ecosystem change. It's aimed at land managers who want to take more radical, large-scale approaches and producing environmental goods. It will be a competitive scheme. The agreements will be bespoke, and what we mean, I suppose the best way to characterize that is it'll be more like a project, and each project is going to be different, and it will be open to individuals or groups of land managers to come together. I think what's changed perhaps in recent thinking is that what we're very keen to explore now within DEFRA is, rather than this being presented as 3 schemes as I've just recited, is can we package all this up as a single service? As a farmer, you're not really interested what silo we put this stuff into. You just want to be able to log on in quite a straightforward way, understand what funding is available to you in your area, select the bits of this that are most appropriate to you, and get on and do it and get some money for it. And what we're very keen to explore over the next few months is how can we just make this all look like one thing to you, the farmer. Next slide, please. So starting to get into a bit of the detail regarding SFI now. So the first point to note is existing schemes will continue to be available. So BPS, we're aware of the scale down, and we'll pick up on that in a little bit in a later slide. Countryside stewardship remains open to new applications. The last live CS agreement will go live in January 24. That's the current plan. So there will be applications this year, and there'll be applications next year for those of you that want to get into that scheme. We are looking, I'll mention this now, the intention is with the early rollout of SFI that you will be able to have countryside stewardship and SFI on the same holding, potentially in the same fields. We just need to make sure we're not paying you to do the same thing twice, and we're working on the detail of that as we speak. Turning back to the focus on SFI, the scheme will grow over the years. So we will introduce new standards, and we intend to test those standards in our pilot before we introduce them to the main scheme. So just looking at the table at the bottom of the slide there, we confirmed in December that this year now, the standards that will be available will be the arable and horticultural soil standards, the improved grassland soils standard, and the first part of the introductory level of moorland and rough grazing standard, and then there will be an offer for animal health and welfare. Next year, and these are more indicative, but the plans are at the moment, we will be introducing to that mix additional standards regarding nutrient management, and that's crop nutrient management, not dairy cows and sheep nutrient, integrated pest management, and the hedgerow standard. In 24, we'll broaden it again to include agroforestry, low no input grassland, the final bits of the moorland standard, water body buffering and farmland biodiversity. And then finally in 25, we'll look to add to the mix an organic standard, on-farm woodland, orchards and specialist horticulture, heritage and dry stone walls. It's interesting, since we published that, we're getting a lot of lobbying, and you know, everybody wants their particular standard brought forward a year. It's really quite surprising. Moving on to the next slide. So getting into, again, another layer of detail down regarding our approach in the uplands with SFI. So first of all land below the moorland line is eligible for all the other standards. And there's no differentiation between those standards for lowland and upland. So we're emulating the approach where we're at BPS at the moment, where SDA and lowland gets more or less the same rate. And we're looking to adopt a similar approach in SFI. Land above the moorland line will be eligible for the moorland and rough grazing standard and potentially other SFI standards. And I say potentially because we're working through the detail. So for example, on the earlier slide, we mentioned a heritage standard. Do we allow the heritage standard to be applied on moorland? We know moorlands are rich in heritage, or do we wrap that into the moorland standard itself? Dry stone walls would be another example. And we are absolutely anticipating that the full offer, if you like, for moorland will be a combination of both the sustainable farming incentive and local nature recovery. Now, considerations when we've been developing the moorland standard. First of all, we've had very strong views that have made it quite clear every moor is different. One standard prescription or one standard set of asks will not work. Not just are, the fells of Cumbria are different to Dartmoor, that are different to Lancashire, Northumberland, but even moors in the same area will vary based on their aspect, their historic management. For SFI, we're wanting to avoid the need for any specialist advice. Not that we've got anything against Julia, but we want farmers to be able to undertake this themselves and keep the money themselves. If you choose to employ an advisor, that's great, but we want this to operate so you can retain as much as the funding as possible. Key here, the introductory level of ambition, we want this to be eligible for our existing ES and CS customers. As I mentioned earlier, roughly 75% of the moorland is in existing agreements. Those are quite comprehensive agreements in terms of what they're delivering for the environment. We can't pay for the same thing twice. So that's really constrained what we can offer and make available in this introductory level. We're trying to avoid the need for any natural inland consenting process for the introductory level. Apologies about the door, the dog's just walked in. And also, and we'll perhaps pick it up in the Q&A, where potentially this concept of deemed consents. And then we also need to think about, and this isn't particular to the Moorland standard, but anything we're asking you to do, anything that we're paying for, we need to be able to confirm that that activity has taken place. The auditors, the RPA, Public Accounts Committee, we need to be confident that what we're paying for is happening on the ground, and that can present some quite practical limitations. Next slide, please. So what the next few moments we'll do, we'll just set out pictorially how the land management payments, we see these evolving over the next few years. Don't forget, in addition to all of this, there's the farm investment funding, there's the resilience funding, there's FIPL, etc. But if we look at the land management payment, so historically, or in the recent past, that's been made up of BPS and CS. This year, this is what the picture will look like. So we'll still have BPS, there will be the SFI introductory level of ambition, there will still be those CSES agreements carrying on, the payment rates have just gone up, so there's the payment rate increase, and some of the landscape recovery projects, a very limited number, are going to start coming on stream. Payments might just make it in for the end of this year, but the bids are coming in and we know there's preparation phases. Once we get to 2024, we will still have the introductory level, there'll be BPS, CS and ES will be around, but in 24, we're intending to introduce the advanced level of ambition and the intermediate level of ambition in SFI. Landscape recovery, local nature recovery will be coming online. And if you just click, thank you. And that process of migrating those CS-ES agreements into like the ELM offer will begin. Thank you. And then the end state that we're aiming for is SFI operating with 3 levels of ambition on the Moorland, with LNR operating on top where that's appropriate, and landscape recovery projects. Now I've phrased this post 2028, not in 2028, because we know some of those CSES agreements will run on longer than 2028. So the process, we won't be completely in that right-hand state by the time we get to 2028. And we've included this slide because I think there's been a lot of concern raised that people have looked at the Moorland introductory level in the announcement that we made in December. I thought, is that it? Hold on a minute, I'm losing £60 BPS and they're giving me £6 back. How's that going to work? And what we've tried to do here with this slide is just set out the bigger picture. Okay, next slide, please. So the Moorland standard and the introductory level, we have not yet finalised the details. We are pulling out all the stops. I think it is fair to say, to get the details of this to you by the beginning of April. And I suppose let me just set out where we've got to with that process. So we are going through an iterative process at the moment in terms of, if you like, creating the Moorland assessment process. We're expecting to be able to share that with stakeholders mid next month, middle of February, where we will then get out on site with stakeholders, with some of you, to look at the practical implications of this. Will this work in practice? And then we can make any changes before we finalise this introductory level in March. The assessment that this introductory level is based around assessing the Moorland, the types of vegetation, how much of it is peat based or mineral soil based, the depth of the peats, its wetness, its associated vegetation. We're going to ask for this assessment to be carried out on an annual basis, and the sample rate will be 1 point per 10 hectares of moorland. And within that, we're looking each year to sample a different site within the moorland. So the picture, the granularity builds up over the years. This assessment data, we then working on a sort of balanced scorecard that will then reflect that data in terms of the moor's ability and its current state in terms of delivering the public goods. And then that will then highlight where there are opportunities in the higher levels of ambition or through other schemes to enhance those public goods. Next slide, please. So completing work on the standards. So we know we've not got this right so far. Let's be quite open about that. We are looking for far greater engagement as we go forward, and that will be kicking off in earnest from the middle of February. We're looking to involve our test and trial farmers, our stakeholders, and our NGOs. And farmers, some of you will be involved in the group we've had set up around the Moorland standard. You will be brought into that, and we're looking to bring more farmers into that group. We also need to keep happy our other policy colleagues, our delivery colleagues. There's no point of standing up to a scheme that RPA can't deliver on time and pay people on time. We need to keep Treasury happy, the legal aspects of this and fairness, and we've touched on audit and compliance requirements. And I've already mentioned previously the timescales that we're working to for the introductory level. And then once we've got the introductory level finalised, we will be moving straight on to the intermediate and advanced levels. Next slide, please. So just moving away from moorlands and perhaps speaking a little bit more generally about SFI and tenancies. So there's no requirement for landlord's consent in SFI. When you as a tenant apply, you need to satisfy yourself that you've got sufficient management control to fulfill the agreement. I think with what we're launching in 22 this year, most tenancies, I don't think there will be a problem, but some of the other standards, perhaps the woodland standard where there's an element of tree planting, for example, you need to have a conversation with your landlord regarding whether that's appropriate, or at least be familiar with the terms of your tenancy agreement. Farmers with between 2 and 3 years left on their tenancy will be eligible to join the scheme. And if the tenancy is not renewed after 2 years, the land can be withdrawn without any breach occurring. Farmers with less than 2 years should not enter the scheme at this stage. And we know we are doing a little bit of work around that statement to see what leeway we've got, but until we've got that confirmed, that's the official line. And then finally, the approach to tenancies and the landscape recovery, we are picking up that work in earnest now, and that's under development. Next slide, please. I will now hand you over to Henry, who's just going to take us through the approach to common land. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. And good evening, everyone. And just to, first of all, quickly echo what Jonathan said at the start, it's a pleasure to be with you all here to have the chance to speak to you all about Commons and SFI and the Moorland standard. So as Jonathan said, I'll just quickly, with an eye on the time, I'll just quickly talk through the approach to common land in the launch of SFI this year, as we set out in the publication at the end of last year. So I'll just give a quick overview of that. So firstly, a quick note on the BPF eligibility for common land. As you'll know, the SFI launch will be open to those who've claimed BPS. And so for commons, the way that will work is if one or more people have used the common to claim BPS in the last 2 years, then that common will be deemed to meet that BPS eligibility requirement. So that's that eligibility side of it. And then looking at the broader approach, firstly, just to say as well, we are currently working on developing some further scheme guidance for how commons will access the scheme and how it will work. So just to mention that. But the key point is that commons will be eligible for SFI through group agreements. So groups who farm and manage the common would need to work together through a single entity to apply for the SFI. That single entity would make the application and be the single point of contact for the application for matters relating to the agreement. The group who farm and manage the common would be responsible for reaching consensus and forming the single entity. Obviously, all commons are quite different, and those farming and managing the given common understand the unique circumstances of that common the best and how they wish to proceed. So our expectation for that single entity is very much that it would be a commons association that would act as that single entity where one exists from an existing or a previous stewardship scheme or outside of a scheme. So as I mentioned, it would be the group's responsibility to form that consensus and the single entity, but we will issue further guidance for commons for the scheme to support that process, and we're working on that, and we'll hopefully have it out as soon as possible. We do recognise that there's an additional administrative complexity to forming and operating via a single entity, and so we will reflect that in the SFI payments, and there'll be an additional payment available for commons entering the scheme. Again, we're working on that now. We're working on that very hard, and along with the guidance and along with the Moorland and rough grazing standard as well. Moving through, then the group who applied working together as the single entity would need to declare that they have sufficient management control of the common in order to enter into an agreement. So in this context, that means, or we said in December, that means having sufficient control of the common to deliver the terms of the agreement for the duration. That would be a judgment for the single entity to make. It doesn't necessarily mean that every commoner has to be part of it, but those who do have to be able to declare that they do have that sufficient management control. Within that, a couple of points. The group would need to consider whether the landowner would need to be part of the single entity or otherwise provide their consent, and would also need to notify others with all known others with a legal interest in the common of their SFI application. And then a quick note on payments. So the RPA would make the payment to the single entity, which would be responsible for deciding how the payments would be divided up between members of the group. And then a few final points to wrap up. A separate application would be required for farmers' own land, so non-common land that the individual either rents or owns. And then, just a note, I mentioned that there'll be this additional payment for commons entering the SFI. Separate to that, we're looking into two options on facilitation for commons groups across the three new environmental land management schemes. And that, I think that completes that section, so we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Jonathan, Henry, thank you so much for that detailed overview of where we have got to with Elm, mostly SFI, obviously so far, but also a little bit about landscape recovery and local nature recovery, and particularly some of that stuff, Henry, you were talking about towards the end of your talk there about management control and collaborative agreements. I know that there are already some questions that have been put in advance about those, so we'll be coming back to those issues. If you have any questions for either of the DEFRA colleagues or our next speaker, please use the Q&A function that's on your screen to add those, and we'll come to those questions after we hear from our next speaker. And I'm absolutely delighted to bring our next speaker onto the screen, and that's Julia Aglionby. Julia and I have been battling on SFI and ELM issues for many a year. Julia is a feisty campaigner on behalf of the Uplands and Common Land, and I'm absolutely delighted that she's here tonight to share her knowledge. She's the Executive Director of the Foundation for Common Land, Chair of the Uplands Alliance, and is a practicing land agent and agricultural valuer. She was a board member of Natural England between 2014 and 2019, so maybe a bit of a gamekeeper turned poacher, you might say, in tonight's talk. And in her doctoral research, she covered governance issues for common land, so she's got a lot of knowledge to bring tonight. She lives in the Eden Valley, and she is on an organic pasture for life care farm. And she says she enjoys working on the farm in her spare time. And I know Julia probably works about 28 hours a day on stuff for common land, so I don't know where her spare time comes from. But I'm absolutely delighted that Julia is with us, and she's going to take us through some practical tips for SFI 22 on moorland and rough grazing. So Julia, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a huge pleasure to be here. And I hope you say, I know you're the battling word. I think, yeah, we seek to work together, don't we? We're on the same side, I think, on all these things, aren't we? I'm on everyone's side. It's all about convening and let's getting good outcomes. So very much, very delighted to have been following on from Henry and Jonathan. And again, we work really closely with DEFRA. And that's the key about the Foundation for Common Land. We are a charity, and we are very much here to enhance the public benefits from common land and the system of commoning. So we're not a lobby group for commoners. We are very much there to make sure the system of commoning continue and can continue to deliver multiple public benefits. And so today I'd really like to talk about the practical tips. We've had an excellent introduction from Jonathan around ELM and SFI, and I've learned lots of things as well. I'm sure you have too, and hearing from Henry about some of the details on commons. So now I'd really like to sort of drill in to the how SFI and moorland might work. And this will work for what I'm saying, it would apply to whether the moorland you farm is common land or not common land. And many people who are commoners will also have enclosed, will have intakes that are common, that are moorland. So any land that is designated as moorland and getting moorland payment will be eligible for this. So do bear that in mind. So really the key is that SFI moorland, the introductory standard, is a preparative scheme. You're not being paid to undertake land management actions. You're being paid to prepare for future schemes. And the key for this is data. And this is my little sort of catchphrase at the moment. The data brings you knowledge, knowledge brings you power, and power helps profitability. And if you're in profit, the more in profit you are, the more you will be able both have a better quality of your life yourself and deliver more for society. So we could move on to the next slide, please. And clearly, Jonathan and I have been looking at the same bits of features available in terms of putting slides together. But I just wanted to, it'd be interesting to compare the two. I have to say that it's a health warning for all my slides, particularly on this one. I put it sort of bold at the top, that the ELM and SFI is still in development and subject to change. It should also stress that it will have to be a general election by December 2024, if not earlier. And at that stage, we do not know what will happen after then. And there is no budget committed after 2024, after the life of this parliament. If this parliament ends earlier, there's no budget committed after then. So it's really important to bear that in mind. So in terms of the situation now, I don't want to go repeat everything that Jonathan said here. So if in terms of your land at the moment, Moorland, you may be in a CS scheme, you may be in an HLS, UELS still rolling over, or you may have no scheme, but you can all apply for SFI 22 and in due course, SFI Intermediate, an advanced standard and local nature recovery. Landscape recovery, as Jonathan has explained, sits to one side. We're really keen that Commons can explore opportunities for landscape recovery. Land, the amount of land to go in is really fixed between 500 hectares and 5,000 hectares for landscape recovery. They may last 20 to 30 years. We think that Commons have a really good opportunity for to go into this, and we're just starting a test and trial for DEFRA looking at that in the Moorlands and in the New Forest. But it's really critical that farmers, we all take the opportunity to prepare for the future, because as I'm sure you're aware, by 2025, your BPS will be declined by approximately 60%. You'll only have 40% left. 2027 is the last year of BPS. 2028, there's none. So this is the chance to really get prepared. Next slide, please. So as I've mentioned already, there are no land management actions required in SFI 22 for moorland and rough grazing. You are being asked to collect data and plan future opportunities for delivering public goods. But the total payment is low, and so you do require a slick system for delivery. And I won't ask DEFRA to comment on this, but they will know that when they announced the payment rate, my view was that it was risking becoming a low ambition and a low offer scheme. £6.45 per hectare is 10% of the current BPS payment on moorland. It is a low, payment, but then the ask is fairly limited. I would say don't do the bare minimum. There is a risk with this that people say, well, actually, we need degree level quality data, and we're only being paid at a GCSE level rate, and we don't have to hand in our homework. And my kids, if they're, when studying for their GCSEs, so they didn't have to give the homework in, they probably wouldn't do it very well, if at all. But my view is here, really look forward. This is about supporting yourselves. It's not about anyone else. God helps those who help themselves. And just because DEFRA's ask is limited, don't restrict yourself to the ask. If you're going out to collect all these sample sites, collect the very best data possible, and make sure that you're able to go to help yourself in the future. We can move on to the next slide. Thanks very much. So in terms of tools for collecting the data, it's not that difficult. This is not rocket science, what we're being asked to do. You will need a map. You will need a smartphone or a camera, preferably where you can, when you take a photo, it will tell you where you've taken the photo. That's going to be extraordinarily helpful. Any sort of normal Android or iPhone will be able to tell you where you've taken the photo. You'll need some information about identifying plants, and Natural England are going to provide some guidance. You'll need a recording form, and Natural England and DEFRA are putting together an app, but you can use a piece of paper, print a form out and take it with a clipboard. And you'll need a pole for measuring peat if you're on a common with any peat. So what we understand at the moment, it's likely to be you'll need to see whether it's less than 40 centimetres of peat or more than 40 centimetres of peat. But if you can collect better quality data, that would be brilliant, because commons and moorland are huge sources of peat. And that means if you know how much peat you've got, you know how much carbon you've got, you can look at how much you're sequestering, and you will be in a position for ensuring that you can be marketing zero carbon livestock as you go forward, and looking at how we can collect carbon credits and make sure your whole business is running well and is fit for addressing the climate crisis, the nature crisis, and high quality food. So moving on to the next slide, please. So we've been working at the Foundation for Common Land really closely with the Land App. The Land App is a community interest company. Some of you may have heard of it, and they have developed a mapping package that even I can use. I never used GIS systems before. I went on a training course once. I found it really scary, but I can use the Land App. And what you do is the key is to have the SBI for your for your farm or for your common, and we're just working with the RPA to ensure you will be able to download the data for your common with the SBI for your current stewardship scheme. If you don't have a current stewardship scheme in UELS, you could use that. So you go onto the Land app, use Chrome as the browser, and it works well. And you will see click new map. And this is an example from Derwent Common. It's a common that's involved in a project that the Foundation for Common Land doing called Our Upland Commons. And if you click on the button Import from Rural Payments Agency, you use the SBI, and bingo, within seconds, your field parcels show up. So this is the blue, it shows the outline of the land, the 3,200 hectares of Derwent Common. So that's the first step, and you can share this with all the commoners on your common, or you can, if you're not on a common, you could share it with other people who are helping you. You could share it with the owner. You could make sure that you're in a position to get the best possible information. You can also upload information if someone's done a FEP from you in the past. You can upload that data as well. SSI data you can upload as well, and they have lots of data layers, and we're working to make sure you can get good reports. So we could move on to the next slide, please. Just going quite fast because I know there are lots of questions, and I'd like us to have a chance to answer some of those. So what's really key, you may remember I said about the having a phone, a smartphone, or a camera where we can geotag the photos. You take your photo here, and I literally did this on a train on the way to give a talk, and I had a photo on my laptop, and I dragged the photo from just onto the top of the map online, and bingo, can you see that there's a little camera here? And if you look at that little camera, then, oh, I'm not showing my screen, so it's right in the middle of the, and then this picture appeared, and the picture is of a sort of bonsai woodland, an upland Atlantic oak woodland that's been fenced off on Derwent Common, and it automatically put that photo in the right place. I can add information about that. You can add documents. You can collect this. It's a great resource, and we're going to be running training courses and helping people use this system. So on to the next slide, please. So there's a report that it produces with all sorts of data. This report costs £14.59 for this particular common 3,200 hectares. So there's a lot of information available and much cheaper than paying a consultant to do it. And I'm all into doing myself out of a job in my practice as a land agent. So this is not the sort of work that good land agents want to do. This is work that if we can get it, use digital technology, great. So literally within seconds, I got that for £14.59. Next, and that showed me all the information about, the different habitats, how many hectares of blanket bog and valley mire and things that are there. So great, gives us a feeling for where we're going. Moving on to the next slide, yes. Coming to commons and how are we going to use this money? If we think of 1,000 hectare common, £6.45 is £6,450. If you have 5 commons there, this is, or you say 10 commoners, that would be, make the maths easy. That's £645 per person per year. Frankly, this money is not transformational. If your business is dependent on £645, probably you shouldn't be in business. Our view is that particularly around commons, where you've got that complexity of dishing out the money, is that probably at least in the first year, and maybe for the whole of the 3 years, you do not distribute that money. You use that money, yes, to pay commoners who are doing the work, but also to make sure that you're not going to be in a position you might want to do some other work. So we're just launching, we've just set a tender for a carbon toolkit specifically for commons. We'll be getting that in later in the year, so that collect as much information as you can, and then you will be able to make informed decisions whether you would like to enter ELM, you would like to seek money from private finance arrangements, or whoever you'd like to do it. But at the moment, I know that the expensive bit and the trying bit of getting a scheme together on a common is how you distribute the money. What we want to do is reduce friction. It's not worthwhile. They're paying £148 as a top up. There may be some more for commons. We hope there will be, but we want to keep it simple and slick. So the question is, what can you do now in terms of so we could move on to the next slide, please. So the key is about preparing. And in terms of timings, my understanding from conversations with the RPA is that these schemes probably will start, maybe apply during the summer. A scheme might go live in September, and then Natural England are recommending that you collect the data in the sort of late summer, autumn, which probably means collecting the data in 2023. So now is the time to get prepared. So do choose and practice with a mapping package. There are lots of different mapping packages available. Just because the Foundation for Common Land Use is partnering at the moment with LandUp doesn't mean that you need to use it. I should say we have no financial interest in their organisation. It's just my life is too short to be able to go with more than one system. Do collect the baseline data on your land parcels, on vegetation surveys. Go to Natural England if you're a triple SI. Make sure, can you get that data in what's called shape files, so you'll be able to upload it. Make sure you have your historic data and from Shine and different sources. And also what's really key is make sure that you've got good information about your common. So contact lists of all the commoners. Is the register up to date? Can you create a live, have you got a live register? Do you know who has which rights? There'll be tenants, there'll be commoners who are actively grazing, those who aren't actively grazing, those who rent their rights out, people who rent their rights in exchange for a bottle of whiskey each year, people who came to an arrangement 23 years ago and don't even know who they've come to arrangement with. So please get that information up to date. It's really important that you will have to inform everybody who has legal rights about going into the scheme. That doesn't mean you need their consent, but you need to inform them. And so in terms of helping you prepare for this, if we could go on to the next slide, please. What we've been doing through our current test and trial that kindly sponsored through DEFRA is that we've been putting together a commons toolkit. So it's a bit like Play School, except instead of 3 windows, we've got 9 windows, and they're all the same shape. They're all the arch window, but I like the arch window. That was one of my favorite ones. If you go through one of these windows, and we will have information available to help you in terms of how do you create a live register. We've got downloadable spreadsheets that you can fill in, so you don't have to, yes, you can change it, but there will be resources there for you. How should you be organizing the finance for your common agreement? What are the mapping options? What information do you need to collect? How do you commission advice should you need that? An information hub, and what about finance? So we've got all those resources. At the moment, it's very much in beta stage. It is live on our website. Do go to foundationforcommonland.org.uk and have a look. Really appreciative of the support we've had in doing this, both through DEFRA and through our heritage funded project called our Upland Commons. So that's all from me. That leaves us 6 minutes, George, for questions. Sorry.
That's fine, thank you. No, you all three of you have provided a really tremendous wealth of information there, and that presentation, Julia, on practical implications was excellent. So thank you for that. But I am going to rush into the questions now. I'm going to invite Helen Radmore to join as well. So if all speakers can please come on camera and come off mute. Helen is our Junior National Vice Chair. She and her family have been upland farmers grazing cattle, sheep and ponies on Dartmoor for many, many years. Helen's got 7 landlords. She's in 3 environmental stewardship agreements. She's chair and administrator of Sheep Store Commons Association and the HLS agreement. She's treasurer of Shore Prior Commoners Association, chair of the Dartmoor Hill Farm Discussion Group, and so on and so on and so on. How she finds time to farm, I'll never know. But she's absolute star for all things uplands for the TFA. So I'm going to go to the pre-submitted questions first, and I'm going to start with a general question, which has come in actually in different ways from 3 members, and I'm going to ask it as a 3-part question and just ask each one of the panel members to give a response to it. And it's around the ethos of the government schemes at the moment. So we have a member from Lancashire who says that his perspective is that Natural England appears only to be interested in reducing stocking levels on commons and is concerned that that will lead to destruction of hefts and increased grazing trespass. And also, if stock numbers do fall, there would be an increased risk of wildfire. A member in Durham suggests that there is a concern that upland livestock production isn't valued as highly as it should be, particularly for its carbon efficiency in comparison to more intensive livestock production systems in other countries. And the third part of that is a member from Northumberland who asks, if we do end up losing a significant proportion of our breeding livestock, if this is the ethos of government schemes, what are the implications for the rest of the UK beef and sheep sector, given that there is a heavily reliance upon the upland sector for cattle and sheep from the uplands? So a bit of a heavy start, but I think it's an overarching issue. What is the ethos of government in terms of these schemes? Is it to take stock out of the system? Over to the panel. So maybe Helen, maybe I'll ask you first, because obviously you engage a lot with this with DEFRA. Do you get that perception? Do you agree with our members here, or do you see a different perspective?
Definitely. On many commons, we do feel that Natural England and other NGOs want to rewild. But what is rewilding? We are all desperate to farm. We also know we farm within the constraints of the areas we farm. So we have to have that balance. But I think the balance is tilted so far away from commoning. And I am worried about the fact that the sheep and the cattle on the common and the offspring, etc., from them moves down the hill. And once the commons are completely destocked, it will have a huge knock-on effect, let alone to the communities that try and farm together.
Thank you, Helen. Jonathan, do you want to come back at that? Do you see that from your perspective in government?
It's a message that we hear loud and clear. I don't think there is an agenda about removing all livestock from the uplands, certainly not within DEFRA. What we need to do is find a balance. I don't think anybody can dispute historically, and if we go back 20, 30 years, we know that the grazing levels in the past have been unsustainable environmentally, and we know that damage has been done. But 75% of our moorlands are already in agreement. A lot of that change is already taken place. We've made together as an industry and as government, we've already made massive steps in the right direction. But we need to find that right balance that allows farmers and growers that are dependent on the uplands to carry on making a living. We need to understand, and we do recognise the impact that changes on a fell can have on the rest of that farm business below the fell wall. And we are very much alive to the fact of the stratified beef and sheep industries. But I think most of that change has already happened. This is about finessing the change. This is about getting each moor in its own way, delivering both food and maximising those environmental gains. We're not there yet, but we'll work together and we will get there in the end.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to move on to another question, which maybe I'll ask Henry to answer this one, if that's okay. Henry, so we've talked a little bit tonight about the introductory standard with the mapping of natural capital, etc., and the information that will be captured by commoners or land managers of the land above the moorland line. Can I ask how you see this information being used and how it will be fed back into the system, and will it be valued? Because previously the situation has been that the information provided by farmers, even though they've got extensive knowledge, has often been dismissed as not scientific enough. So what is this data going to be used for? How is it to be collated, and what value will it be to you and Natural England?
you very much, George. At the risk of, I don't want to duck the question, but I think Jonathan might be best placed to answer that,
Okay.
developing some of those standards. So I apologise.
No problem at all with that, Henry. I'm going to turn that question on its head, and not in a evasive way. The value of the information that we're collecting as part of the assessment, we want you to use it, not Natural England. So you're all really skilled and experienced in looking at your moorlands and your fells and judging their capacity to produce food. How many ewes and lambs can I keep up there will get those lambs to a particular weight by a certain date? What we want to do is use that moorland assessment and the scorecard that we're developing to help you look at what the potential is for that moor to deliver for the environment as well. To give you that knowledge and that understanding so that we can develop a shared perspective and a shared outcome. Always dangerous to stray into religion, but I will draw an analogy. If we go back to medieval times, the Bible was written in Latin, and if you wanted to access God, you went through a priest. The Bible these days is written in English, and we can all access God.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Amen to that. I would say yes, well done. We've had two references to God tonight because Julia has also done that, so that's excellent. So moving on then to another issue that has been raised by a member in Cumbria, and maybe I'll ask Julia and Helen to answer this one. So how do we get around the fact that on commons, it's graziers who will be losing their basic payment scheme payments, but may not have sufficient management control for the purposes of carrying out the requirements of ELM, particularly when we get beyond the basic level of SFI that we've got. So maybe, Julia, do you want to just focus on management control there?
Yeah, thanks very much. I've been giving a lot of thought to this, and what's really important, if we think about what DEFRA are looking for, they're looking for nature recovery and they're looking for climate carbon storage, and both of those, grazing is absolutely critical to both of those. And the owner of a common or the landlord of a common, so the landowner, if it's just a landlord tenant situation, in neither case can they deliver that without the collaboration of the graziers. So graziers, in effect, neither the owner nor the commoners / tenant have control. And that means this is all about collaboration and working together. What the Foundation for Common Land is very against is anyone having a right of veto, and particularly acting in an unreasonable way. So under current schemes, owners have been able to effectively obstruct agreements, and that has been very damaging to relations between owners and tenants and owners and commoners. Similarly, individual commoners have been able to obstruct agreements, and that has also been damaging because you've needed complete consensus. So if we think about carbon, for instance, what we're really interested in, everybody's interested in, is how much carbon is being stored, not what's there, but how much are you absorbing from the atmosphere. And that will be affected by how the common is being grazed. And I said we're commissioning a piece of work on how to do those calculations. And so it's absolutely working together. And that can be very, very difficult. And I have spent a lot of time doing that and put 65,000 hectares into HLS. You know, it takes time. You don't need to worry about that for the SFI 22. We don't have to go through that negotiation process. But what's important is to start those conversations about what are the opportunities on the common, bring in the owner, bring in all the commoners, have the conversations so that when LNR comes on stream, and we would expect the vast majority of commons and moorland to be able to access that should they choose to do so, then you are prepared. It goes back to this question about data that Jonathan so articulately answered. Collect the data at the very best possible standard to help yourself. You are doing this to help yourselves, not to help DEFRA. DEFRA are enabling you by offering a scheme to do this. But what's critical is it's your future that you're looking after.
Thank you, Julia. Helen, has management control been an issue for you in all of the agreements that you've been involved in and looking ahead to do?
I think there's a lot of circumstances where, because many of the tenants have many tenancies with different lengths and different types of tenancies, sometimes they can be in the position that they have an AHA that may only have a couple of years left and an AHA that obviously has a lot longer. They might be able to put one in, but not the other. This creates an awful lot of problems. You're going to have a lot more issues when the BPS have gone. You're going to have so much more pressure on the individual business and the owners to recuperate money. I think it's going to exacerbate the problems that we've had in the past, which has been bad enough to manage the control and the timings within a longer agreement, and how we get those people to work together, and how people can dip in or dip out of one of these longer agreements. It is going to have big implications, I think.
Thanks, Helen. And just another question has come in from a member in North Yorkshire, which speaks into that issue, which I might just throw at Julia, if she doesn't mind. The member asks, how do we achieve fairness in attempting to reach collaborative agreements on common land, particularly when there are vested interests which seek to control matters, including, in this case, the influence of Freemasonry, which has been cited here as an issue. Obviously, your doctorate speaks into this type of arrangement. How do we achieve fairness?
Well, I didn't know. When I sat on my parents' knee, the first thing they taught me was that life isn't fair. So, you know, what we're trying to do is to make things fairer. And I was trained by a superb land agent called Alan Bow, and he said to me, if everyone's a bit unhappy, you've probably got it about right, Julia. So it's when we can't make this perfect, but it's very important. I would say the key things about getting this perfect is early conversations and allowing the time to have those conversations. It's about being transparent with the data and the information, and effectively saying to people, if people are being obstructive, you know, you call their bluff. I even once took my baby along and ended up feeding her because the conversation went on so long. Actually, they all thought she was great and they signed a document. So I'm not prepared to have any more children in order to get more deals. I think so, but it's very, very hard work in order to get agreements. Now, whether it's any particular vested interest group, and women, I understand, aren't eligible to be Freemasons, so clearly I'm excluded from that particular group conversation. There are other groups apart from Freemasons that club together as well, and I would say it's hard if people are doing this in a secretive way. What's important is for me is that I sit in everybody's kitchen separately and have a conversation with them about their position. And it takes time to do this. And, you know, that's why I'm suggesting people get prepared now. Look at the data. How many rights do you have? What's going to be appropriate and who's contributing what to an agreement, and we will be providing on our toolkit, you know, information to help that. Inevitably, there are people who don't play by the book, and that is difficult in all walks of life. We have asked repeatedly to DEFRA for a sort of reasonableness test and dispute resolution. James Cross promised it when he was Chief Exec of Natural England. It hasn't materialised. We asked George Eustace for it recently. I think Henry was sitting in on the call. He thought it was a good idea, but I think now there's more of a laissez-faire policy from George Eustace, according to management of the countryside, and that makes it harder. So governance does require a structure and a rule-based system, and I would hope that DEFRA will take their responsibilities seriously in that regard and consider that it's worthwhile investing in that, because otherwise there are going to be some really tough situations, but you can mitigate against those through early preparation, and very importantly, having an independent person to negotiate that. And the TFA and the Foundation for Common Land have put together a paper making this proposal to DEFRA, and we would very much like that system to be put in place. So do encourage, if any of you, I'm sure all of you will have an MP, do write to your MPs if you're concerned about this, do make it an issue, and we can hopefully help move things forward.
Jonathan, do you want to quickly respond to that challenge?
We're looking into it.
Thank you. Well, excellent. Okay, and we've had one question which Julia has typed an answer to, but I will just read it out. So Robert Graham said, we form a block of registered common land, which is also governed by its own Act of Parliament. Under the Act, we have a full 1986 Agricultural Holdings Act tenancy, and I'm the sole tenant. Does the situation override some of the commons criteria discussed here? And Julia's answer was, it depends if there is an owner or not, and the norm is if there are two or more beneficiaries from the scheme, any combination of owner, tenants, commoners, and the application needs to follow the rules for commons. So Robert, if you want to come back on that, please get in touch after tonight. So we have now overrun. The team behind me will be very pleased to have their national chairman back, because he chairs these things rather more efficiently than I've done tonight within the hour. So I do apologize for running over, but I think we've had a really good session tonight with really good information provided to us and some useful answers to the questions. So can I thank on your behalf our speakers for tonight, Jonathan and Henry from DEFRA. Thank you so much. Julia, for coming and giving us your insight from a practical perspective, and Helen for being on hand to answer some of those tricky questions. Thank you so much indeed. And also thank you to Julia Meadows, who's our communications and events coordinator, who's come out of her sickbed tonight to run the technology for us. So thank you to Julia. And also huge thanks again to Barclays for sponsoring tonight's webinar and our series of webinars. And they will be available on our YouTube channel. If you go there, this one will be up there in a few days' time once we have edited it down to a watchable length. We have a couple of events coming up. So on the 16th of February, we have a webinar looking at nature-based farming, and we're delighted to have Caroline Drummond, MBE, who is the Chief Executive of LEAF. And on Wednesday, March the 23rd, we have a webinar on the BPS lump sum exit scheme with the DEFRA civil servant responsible for that scheme, Claire Williams, who's the team leader on direct payments and part of the Future Farming and Countryside Programme development team. So that's 16th of February and 23rd of March to put in your calendar. Don't forget to register in advance for those virtual events. So having run over by nearly 15 minutes, I wish you a very good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight, and all the very best for the rest of the evening.